The stars burned cold, their light flickering across the vast, endless expanse of space. The serenity of the cosmos was shattered by a distant, ominous hum, a sound of metal against metal. The N'Zoth fleet was here, an unstoppable wave of destruction. It stretched across the stars like a black, monstrous cloud, its innumerable ships closing in on Earth. Their approach was inevitable, their presence suffocating. These were no ordinary invaders. The N'Zoth were ancient, their civilization spanning millennia. They were a race of terrifying efficiency, built for war and conquest. Their ships were colossal, armed with devastating weaponry capable of obliterating entire fleets with a single shot. Each ship was a weapon of mass destruction, a city of terror wrapped in impenetrable armor. Their fleets had crushed dozens of worlds, leaving nothing but scorched ruins in their wake. And now Earth, humanity's last sanctuary, stood at the edge of annihilation. Inside Earth's orbit, the last remnants of humanity's fleet had gathered. The Genesis, Earth's flagship, was surrounded by an eclectic assortment of warships, each a relic of humanity's struggle to survive in the stars. The ships were smaller, lighter, and far less advanced than their alien counterparts, but they carried the weight of every human life left in the galaxy. The bridge of the Genesis was a whirlwind of activity. Officers and crew members moved with mechanical precision, their faces grim and determined. The lights of the ship flickered briefly as it swayed under the mounting pressure of the N'Zoth fleet's gravitational pull. Admiral Riker stood at the center, his eyes locked onto the tactical display in front of him, where the N'Zoth fleet appeared as a vast, swirling mass of red icons. His fingers hovered over the control panel, the weight of the decision pressing on him. "Status report," Riker demanded, his voice steady but strained. "All systems are operational, Admiral," Commander Voss replied, his voice tight. "But we're outgunned, outnumbered. There's no way we can win this. Our best chance is to retreat and regroup, but Earth—" "I know," Riker interrupted, his eyes narrowing. He could see the fear creeping into Voss's voice, and it mirrored the dread that gnawed at him. Humanity had fought this war for decades, a war they had never chosen but had no choice but to endure. The N'Zoth had taken everything: worlds, colonies, cities, and now Earth was the last bastion of resistance. And yet the N'Zoth were closing in with relentless precision. Their final blow was imminent. "Give me the numbers," Riker pressed, his voice low and measured. Voss turned to face the display. Their flagship, the Zalira, is a dreadnought of unimaginable power. It dwarfs anything we've ever encountered, and that's just the flagship. The N'Zoth fleet is vast, over 200 ships, each capable of vaporizing entire battle groups in seconds. Riker's gaze never wavered. His mind raced, searching for a way out, a glimmer of hope. But there was nothing. No hidden weapon, no secret strategy that would turn the tide. The Genesis was outclassed, outgunned, and utterly outmatched. And yet a flicker of something remained, something deep within the recesses of human history, buried in the ancient records of Earth's lost civilizations. The last beacon, a fabled artifact said to possess unimaginable power hidden beneath the surface of Earth. Could it be real? Was it merely a myth, a legend spun from the fabric of desperation? "We have no choice," Riker said, his voice firm, almost as if convincing himself more than anyone else. "We're going to fight." "We can't," Voss started, but Riker silenced him with a sharp gesture. "We fight or we die. There is no retreat, not anymore." The crew watched in stunned silence as Riker made his decision. His face was set, eyes burning with the weight of leadership and the responsibility of every soul on board the Genesis. There was no time for doubt. The countdown had begun. "Fire the first salvo," Riker commanded, his voice unwavering. And so, humanity's final stand began. The Genesis roared to life, its weapons systems coming online with a sudden surge of power. Laser cannons, pulse weapons, and missile pods activated, their deadly payloads launching into the void with blinding speed. A volley of destructive fire surged toward the N'Zoth fleet, striking the first of the enemy ships. Explosions blossomed in the dark like stars being born, brief flashes of hope against the overwhelming darkness. But the N'Zoth retaliated swiftly, their return fire crashing into the Genesis with a force that rattled every compartment. The ship shook violently, alarms blaring as the shields flickered under the onslaught. Crew members scrambled, working to stabilize systems as the battle raged on. As Riker stood at the center of it all, his eyes scanned the screen, watching the destruction unfold. The N'Zoth ships moved with terrifying coordination, their fleet a well-oiled machine of destruction. But there was one thing they hadn't accounted for: the unyielding spirit of humanity. "Admiral, we've detected a massive energy surge from beneath the surface of Earth," reported Lieutenant Tran, her voice tight with urgency. "It's the beacon. It's active." Riker's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Was this the key to victory? "I want every ship to follow my lead. We push through. We find that beacon," Riker ordered. "We'll make our stand at whatever cost. If it's our time to die, we die fighting." And as the battle erupted around them, a faint glimmer of hope began to take form in the heart of Earth. The possibility that humanity's last desperate strike might just turn the tide. Would this mysterious artifact be the weapon they needed to win? Or was it another piece of lost history waiting to be buried beneath the ruins of a broken world? The Genesis surged forward, its engines roaring to life, tearing through the void like a comet on a collision course with destiny. Every crew member on the bridge was locked in a dance of controlled chaos, their every move driven by the single, unshakable goal: reach the surface of Earth, where the beacon pulsed with strange, enigmatic power. The N'Zoth fleet was relentless, pursuing them with unyielding precision. It didn't matter how many ships they lost or how many blinding explosions lit up the dark sky. Nothing would stop them. "Admiral, the Zilira is locking onto us," Lieutenant Tran reported, her voice filled with tension. "They're concentrating fire. We won't last long with this kind of heat." Riker's jaw clenched. He knew they were running out of time. The N'Zoth flagship, the Zilira, had long since ceased being a mere warship. It was a symbol of destruction, an apex predator of the stars. It was the heart of the enemy fleet, and the longer it remained intact, the smaller their chances of survival. "Status." "On the beacon," Riker demanded, his eyes glued to the flickering tactical readout. "It's emitting a high-frequency energy pulse. Definitely not natural," Tran replied. "Whatever it is, it's amplifying, growing stronger with every second, but we're not sure what it will do once we reach the surface. Then we'll have to find out," Riker said. His voice was firm, but beneath it there was an edge of uncertainty. The N'Zoth were no fools. They would know what the beacon was, and they would not let it fall into human hands. The Genesis shook again as another salvo from the N'Zoth dreadnought slammed into its hull. Sparks flew across the bridge. Alarms screamed, and Riker gritted his teeth. The ship was already damaged, but it was far from dead. The crew was pushing their limits, and Riker knew that every last ounce of human resolve would be needed to get them through this. "Revert power to the rear shields," Riker barked. "Voss, can we shake them?" Commander Voss gripped the console in front of him, sweat dripping from his brow. "We're going to try, but it's going to take everything we've got. Helm, engage evasive maneuvers. Full thrusters, maximum velocity." The Genesis shot forward, engines firing with a deafening roar as the ship rocketed through space. The N'Zoth ships followed like a swarm of predatory insects, their laser beams cutting the void between them with devastating precision. The space around them was a blinding, chaotic maelstrom of explosions and energy discharges, an endless ballet of death that threatened to consume everything in its path. But even as Riker's crew fought to outmaneuver their pursuers, something more troubling was happening. A deep tremor ran through the Genesis, one that seemed to come from beneath them, beneath Earth itself. The beacon's power was rising, its energy crackling like the first whispers of a storm. The ship's systems flickered erratically, as if they were struggling to cope with the alien force that was now awakening. "What the hell is happening?" Riker demanded, his voice low and tense. "The ship's not responding. What's going on?" "With the beacon. Whatever it is, it's messing with our systems," Tran said, her fingers flying across the controls. "It's interfering with our power grid, our shields. It's like the Genesis is being pulled toward the surface." It was true. Despite the crew's best efforts, the Genesis was being irresistibly drawn in. the pull of the beacon's energy more powerful than anything they had anticipated. They were caught in its gravitational web, unable to break free. The N'Zoth ships, seeing their prey in distress, began to close in even faster. Riker could feel the sweat dripping down his back, his heart pounding in his chest. They had no time left. "Admiral!" Voss shouted, his voice filled with dread. "We've got N'Zoth. Frigates closing in on us too fast. We won't make it to the beacon in time." Riker's gaze fixed on the Earth below. The atmosphere was now a hellscape of fire and smoke, as if the planet itself were boiling in the wake of the N'Zoth advance. It was a vision of Armageddon, a last glimpse of humanity's home before it was swallowed by alien conquest. But there was no time for despair. "All hands prepare for impact," Riker ordered, his voice a command that rang through the ship's intercom. "Engage all remaining weapons. This is it, people." The Genesis shuddered violently as a direct hit sent the ship careening off course. Riker barely maintained his balance, the floor tilting beneath his feet. He knew that their weapons, powerful as they were, would never be enough to take down the N'Zoth ships. They were too big, too powerful. But what if the beacon could be the key? If they could reach it? Suddenly, a new alarm screamed through. The ship. "Admiral!" Lieutenant Tran's voice was frantic. "The N'Zoth are about to breach our hull. Shields are collapsing." Riker's eyes widened as the N'Zoth ships drew closer, their weapons primed for the final strike. It was a matter of seconds before they would tear through the Genesis like paper. But in that moment, a massive pulse of energy exploded from beneath the Earth's surface, like 1,000 suns exploding in unison. The shockwave washed over the fleet with terrifying force. Riker's body was thrown backward as the Genesis lurched violently, a deep guttural hum echoing through the ship. The lights flickered, the alarm silenced, and for a brief impossible moment there was stillness. What just happened?" Voss whispered, his voice filled with awe and fear. The beacon was awake. But what had it done? Had it simply activated, or had it unleashed something far more dangerous? The N'Zoth ships hesitated, their formations breaking apart. The Zalira slowed its approach, as though sensing something they hadn't anticipated. A ripple of uncertainty passed through the alien fleet. Something had changed, but Riker knew this was only the beginning. The beacon had triggered something far more powerful than they could have imagined. And in this moment of fragile hope, the true battle for humanity's survival had only just begun. The Genesis hung in space like a wounded animal, its hull scarred and cracked, but still intact. Inside, the crew was in chaos, systems failing, alarms blaring, and crew members scrambling to regain control of their ship. But despite the damage, despite the certainty of death that had loomed mere moments ago, there was a flicker of hope. The pulse from the beacon had sent shockwaves through space, distorting the very fabric of reality itself. The N'Zoth fleet, once a well-coordinated swarm of predators, now seemed lost, their formations breaking apart in confusion. It was as if something had interrupted their will to fight, their instincts twisted by an unknown force. Even the mighty Zalira, flagship of the N'Zoth armada, had slowed, its energy weapons momentarily powered down. "Admiral, I don't know what just happened," Lieutenant Tran said, her fingers racing across her console, trying to assess the damage. "We're still functional, but we've lost half of our auxiliary power. Shields are barely holding together." Riker stood, staring at the starry void outside the ship's observation windows. The N'Zoth fleet was still there, but now they seemed hesitant. It was a brief moment, a window of opportunity. The pulse had done something to the N'Zoth, and in that vulnerability, humanity's chance to survive was born. "We need to take advantage of this," Riker muttered, his mind racing. "Whatever that pulse was, it's disrupted their systems. I'm guessing the beacon sent out an EMP of some kind. We need to move now." He turned to Voss, who was already at the tactical display, tracking the N'Zoth fleet's movements. "How many ships are still fully operational?" Riker asked. Voss paused, his fingers dancing over the controls as he assessed the situation. "We still have about 20 N'Zoth ships in play, but their coordination is shot. A few are firing at random. Others are just drifting, and the Zalira, it's trying to realign, but it's off balance. Theirs could be our moment. Then we take it, Riker said, his voice like steel. "Prepare the fleet. All remaining ships follow my lead. We hit them hard." He could feel the tension in the air as the crew moved into action. The Genesis shuddered, again as it powered up its remaining weaponry, and the smaller human warships, though battered, began to line up behind their flagship, forming a disjointed but formidable line. Riker's plan was reckless, but it was their only chance. They had to capitalize on the moment of weakness. The N'Zoth may have been shaken, but they were not finished. Riker knew that deep down the Zilira would recover soon, and when it did, their advantage would be gone. The human fleet had to strike fast, while the enemy was disorganized and vulnerable. "Lieutenant, try and open a channel to all ships," Riker ordered. "Tell them to target the N'Zoth frigates first. If we take out the smaller ships, we can draw the Zilira in close enough to deliver a finishing blow." A moment of silence passed before Tran's voice crackled over the comm. "Channel open, Admiral." "All ships," Riker began, his voice steady and authoritative. "We've been given an opportunity thanks to the beacon. The N'Zoth are confused, their fleet is broken, but they won't stay that way for long. If we want to win, we need to strike now. Concentrate all fire on their frigates, take out their support ships, and we'll draw the Zilira into range. This is our chance. Don't waste it." The channel buzzed with confirmation as the human fleet shifted into position, moving as one cohesive unit despite their various designs and technologies. They were still underpowered, still outgunned, but in this fleeting moment of chaos, they fought like a unified force with a single purpose: survival. As the human fleet moved into formation, the Zilira began to stabilize. Its immense hull shimmered in the dark as energy coursed through its systems. The N'Zoth queen, Zilira herself, was not one to be easily beaten. Her vessel, a behemoth that had raised civilizations, was starting to show signs of life again, and with it, the N'Zoth were recovering their coordination. Riker could see it on the tactical display. The frigates had begun to regroup, their disarray now giving way to an organized counter-offensive. "They're closing in fast," Voss reported. "Their larger ships are repositioning to protect the Zilira. The remaining frigates are targeting us." Riker's mind raced. They couldn't afford to let the Zilira escape their strike radius. "Brace for impact," he barked. "Weapons hot. Let's give them everything we've got." The Genesis fired first, a barrage of high-velocity missiles that sliced through the darkness, homing in on the N'Zoth frigates with unrelenting precision. The smaller enemy ships exploded in bright flashes of fire, their fragile hulls disintegrating under the force of humanity's final retaliation. But the N'Zoth were quick to retaliate. They were re-establishing their formations. Heavy fire rained down on the human fleet, and several of the smaller ships were torn apart in seconds. "Get us closer to the Zilira," Riker commanded, his knuckles white from gripping the rail in front of him. The ship groaned under the strain, but it was still moving forward, toward the heart of the enemy's power. Through the chaos, Riker's thoughts drifted back to the beacon. The power it had unleashed was far beyond anything he had anticipated. The N'Zoth were clearly disturbed by it, perhaps even frightened. And yet, it was clear that the true potential of the beacon had not yet been realized. What was it? Was it simply a weapon of war or something more? A force of nature? A relic of an ancient time waiting for someone to awaken it? The Zilira loomed ahead, its massive guns swinging toward the human fleet. This was it. They were in range, but so were the N'Zoth. It would be a battle of attrition. Whoever could land the first fatal blow would claim the victory. All ships. "Fire at will," Riker shouted, his voice ringing with a mix of desperation and determination. "We've come this far. Let's finish it." The Genesis and its fleet surged forward, unleashing their final volley of weapons. The stars around them seemed to explode in a maelstrom of energy, as missiles, laser blasts, and plasma shells collided with the N'Zoth ships. The enemy's frigates splintered and broke apart, but the Zilira, the queen of their armada, remained unyielding. The battle had become a brutal, desperate dance of destruction, with each side pushing forward, each side unwilling to surrender. But as the chaos unfolded, something inside Riker shifted. He was no longer fighting just for humanity's survival. He was fighting for the future of the galaxy itself, for the mystery of the beacon and the ancient power it held within. Would it be enough? Would the beacon's power tip the scales in their favor? Or would humanity's last stand become a footnote in the history of a galaxy ravaged by war? The Genesis shook violently as another barrage from the Zelyra slammed into its shields. Sparks flew across the bridge and Riker's teeth ground together. As the ship lurched to one side, the Zelyra had regained its composure, and now it was bringing its full might to bear. The human fleet was holding its ground, but only just. Their weapons, though deadly, were no match for the sheer size and firepower of the N'Zoth dreadnought. Riker knew that if they didn't act fast, this might be the last fight they ever fought. "Admiral," Voss shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "The Zelyra is powering up its main cannon. If that hits us, we won't survive." Riker's eyes narrowed. The main cannon of the Zelyra was a weapon of unimaginable destruction. A single shot could obliterate an entire fleet. He had seen its power firsthand during the initial assault on Earth. Now it was aimed squarely at the heart of humanity's resistance. "How long until the cannon is ready?" Riker demanded. 30 seconds, Voss replied, his voice tight with tension. "We can't outrun it, and we can't match its firepower." Riker's mind raced. The Genesis was a formidable ship, but it wasn't invincible. The only way they would survive this was by turning the tide, by forcing the Zelyra to misfire, to make a critical mistake. "Lieutenant Tran, can you override the targeting systems on their main cannon?" Riker asked, his voice sharp. Tran's fingers flew over the console, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm trying, sir. The Zelyra's targeting systems are heavily encrypted, but—" She paused, eyes widening. "Wait, I think I can hack their comms. If I can disrupt their internal communications, I can confuse their targeting system long enough for us to make our move." "Do it," Riker said, his pulse quickening. "We don't have much time." The Genesis rocked again as the Zelyra fired another volley, its energy cannons lighting up the dark expanse of space. The ship's forward shields held, just barely, but the Genesis was beginning to lose speed. The N'Zoth were closing in again. Riker's mind was a storm of possibilities. He needed to act. The clock was ticking. "Admiral," Lieutenant Tran's voice cut through the tension, "I've accessed their comms. Initiating disruption now." There was a beat of silence, then a surge of static over the comms. The entire bridge was flooded with the sound of broken transmissions, alien voices scrambling to regain control. Then, just as the Zelyra powered up its main cannon, a sudden distortion rippled through its targeting systems. The ship's weapons flickered and sputtered as if trying to recalibrate. The massive beam that had been aimed at the Genesis shifted, just a fraction, but it was enough. The Zelyra fired. The energy beam ripped through space, missing the Genesis by mere inches. The blast sailed past them, striking a nearby N'Zoth destroyer that had been too close to the Zelyra. The ship exploded in a brilliant flash, taking several smaller vessels with it. The Zelyra, caught off guard by the unexpected misfire, faltered, its systems struggling to recalibrate. "Now!" Riker shouted. "This is our chance! Open fire!" The human fleet didn't hesitate. Weapons ignited across the Genesis and the remaining ships, unleashing a barrage of plasma and laser fire. The smaller N'Zoth frigates, already crippled from previous exchanges, crumpled under the intensity of the assault. The Zelyra, however, was a different beast. Its thick armor and advanced shielding absorbed the first wave, but it was clear that the ship was no longer at its peak. The disruption had worked, and now the N'Zoth flagship was struggling to maintain control of the battle. The Genesis surged forward, weapons blazing, and Riker could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The N'Zoth were wounded, their leadership vulnerable, but they needed more than just firepower. The human fleet had to get close enough to strike at the heart of the Zelyra, its reactor. "Voss, what's our status?" Riker demanded. "We're almost in range of the Zelyra's reactor core," Voss said, his voice grim. "But they're powering up their shields again. We're going to need one more shot, a decisive one. We don't have time to wait," Riker muttered. He stood, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair as he leaned forward. "Tell the fleet to prepare for a full assault. We're going straight for their core, maximum thrust, no retreat." The crew moved like a well-oiled machine, responding to Riker's orders with the same determination that had carried them this far. The remaining human ships sped toward the Zelyra, their weapons blazing, their shields flickering under the punishing fire from the N'Zoth flagship. The Zelira, still recovering from the disruption, fired wildly, its shots missing their targets by a wide margin. Riker's heart raced as the Genesis surged closer. He could see the massive silhouette of the Zelira looming ahead, a floating citadel of death. The giant N'Zoth ship was now surrounded by a cloud of smaller vessels, fragments of the once imposing armada. But the true prize lay within the heart of the ship, its reactor. If they could breach it, the entire N'Zoth fleet would be crippled. "All ships concentrate fire on the Zelira's core," Riker shouted, his voice booming over the comms. "This is our final strike. Do not let up." The Genesis lurched forward, its weapons discharging in synchronized bursts. A blinding flash of light erupted from the Zelira's hull as one of the human missiles breached its outer armor. Then the ship's core, its heart, came into view, glowing ominously with a dangerous, volatile energy. Riker knew that if they hit it now, it would cause a chain reaction that could destroy the entire fleet. "Firing!" Lieutenant Tran called out, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. The Genesis fired a final volley, a devastating shot aimed squarely at the Zelira's reactor. Time seemed to slow as the projectile cut through the dark void. The entire fleet held its breath, and then it struck. The explosion was like nothing Riker had ever witnessed. A pulse of energy radiated outward from the Zelira, sending shock waves through the entire battle. The N'Zoth ships around it were torn apart, their debris scattering like chaff in the wind. The Zelira itself erupted in a brilliant, blinding inferno, a supernova in the depths of space. The remaining N'Zoth ships faltered, their coordinated movements thrown into disarray as the flagship, once the heart of their war machine, was reduced to nothing more than a floating carcass. Riker stood at the helm of the Genesis, breathless, eyes fixed on the ruins of the Zelira. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The battlefield was still, the sound of distant explosions reverberating in the empty expanse of space. Humanity had won. The silence that followed the destruction of the Zelira was deafening. For a moment, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath, as if it too was waiting to see if humanity's victory would be worth the cost. The battlefield, once teeming with destruction, was now a graveyard of charred husks, fragments of N'Zoth ships drifting aimlessly. Their once mighty forms now nothing more than twisted wreckage, but the victory felt hollow to Riker. Standing on the bridge of the Genesis, he could feel it in his bones, the weight of what they had just done. The cost of survival was far greater than he had ever anticipated. The N'Zoth had been vanquished, but at what price? Humanity had lost too many ships, too many brave souls who had fought alongside him, and the scar on his heart would never heal. The Genesis, though victorious, was barely holding together. Its engines sputtered. Its hull was marred with the traces of the battle, and the crew was exhausted. They had given everything, and yet it didn't feel like enough. "Admiral Riker," Voss said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "The fleet is... We've lost more than half of our ships. The Genesis is still operational, but we've lost vital systems. We don't have the fuel to return to Earth, not with the damage we've sustained." Riker nodded, his gaze fixed on the shattered remains of the Zelira. He could hear the distant hum of the ship's damaged systems, a constant reminder of the fragility of their situation. "I know," he said, his voice weary but firm. "We've done what we needed to do, but this is far from over." Voss stared at him, as if waiting for more. Riker could feel the weight of every word he had to speak. "We're stranded here, in the heart of N'Zoth space, with no fleet to return to Earth, no reinforcements and no allies. It's just us now." A heavy silence settled on the bridge. Lieutenant Tran, who had been hunched over her console, slowly turned to face the Admiral. "Sir, there's something else. Something strange," she said, her voice trembling. Riker's pulse quickened. "What is it?" We're not alone," she said, her fingers shaking as she pointed to the long-range sensors. "There's something out there, something we didn't expect." Riker followed her gaze, his heart skipping a beat. On the display there was a faint but unmistakable signal. It was coming from the outer rim of N'Zoth space, too far to be detected by standard long-range scans, but clear enough to send a chill through his spine. It was a beacon, a faint pulse of energy that seemed to be reaching out into the vastness of space, drawing the Genesis's sensors like a magnet. "Can you identify it?" Riker asked, his voice low and tense. Tran shook her head. "No, sir, it's unlike anything we've encountered before, but the energy signatures are... It's not N'Zoth technology. And it's not human either. This is something ancient, something old." The word echoed in Riker's mind. Old. They had already awakened one ancient force, the beacon that had disrupted the N'Zoth fleet. But this was different. This was beyond their understanding, beyond anything that had been discovered in the depths of the galaxy. Riker felt his gut twist with a mixture of excitement and dread. Whatever this was, it could change everything. It could be the key to humanity's future, or it could be their doom. "Set a course for that signal," Riker ordered, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. "We can't afford to ignore it. If it's a weapon, we need to understand it. If it's a threat, we need to neutralize it before it becomes another Zelera." "Understood," Tran said, her fingers flying across her console as she plotted the course. "I'm setting the coordinates now, but Admiral, if this is what I think it is, we could be walking into something even more dangerous than the N'Zoth." "I know," Riker replied, "but we don't have a choice. We have to take that risk. Humanity's survival depends on it." As the Genesis powered up its engines and slowly began its course toward the mysterious signal, Riker's thoughts raced. They had just won a battle that would be sung about for generations, but in the grand scheme of things, it felt like they had barely scratched the surface of the forces at play in the universe. The N'Zoth were only one threat, and there were others who had been lying in wait, watching from the shadows, waiting for their time to strike. Riker's fingers tightened on the armrest of his chair. He had no illusions about what lay ahead. There was no going back now. They had committed to this journey, and they had to see it through. The galaxy had just witnessed humanity's greatest triumph. But Riker knew that the real story was just beginning. The darkened corridors of the Genesis felt quieter now, the crew moving through them like ghosts, haunted by the battles they had fought and the ones still to come. Riker knew the weight of their collective loss, but he also knew that they couldn't afford to mourn, not yet, not until the mission was complete. The Genesis was a symbol now, not just of humanity's will to survive, but of the hope that burned bright in the hearts of those who had dared to fight back against impossible odds. And yet, as the ship moved deeper into the unknown, Riker couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the victory they had just won had opened the door to something far more dangerous, a force that had been waiting for eons, waiting for the right moment to strike. The journey was far from over. They had won the battle, but the war was just beginning. The Genesis slid silently through the vast emptiness of space, its hull groaning in protest as it maintained its course toward the mysterious signal. Riker stood at the helm, staring at the flickering readouts, his mind a whirlpool of questions and possibilities. What lay ahead was an enigma, an ancient force dormant for eons, now drawing humanity toward it with an irresistible pull. The crew was restless. They had just survived the destruction of the Zelera, the apex of the N'Zoth armada, and yet the weight of victory was heavy. The cost of that victory had been too high, and as they ventured deeper into the unknown, it felt like they were stepping into the belly of the beast. Whatever awaited them at the source of that signal, Riker knew one thing for sure. This was not a mere relic. This was something far beyond their understanding, a force capable of shifting the balance of the galaxy in ways they couldn't predict. "Admiral," Lieutenant Tran's voice broke through his reverie, pulling him back to the present. "We've reached the coordinates. The signals, it's coming from inside an asteroid belt. It's a small cluster of rocks, but they're emitting strange energy readings. I've never seen anything like it." Riker's brow furrowed. A small cluster of asteroids? That didn't make sense. They had expected to find something massive, something that would stand out against the backdrop of the cosmos. Instead, they had found a pocket of obscurity, hidden in plain sight. "Is it a trap?" Voss asked, his voice tense. Riker shook his head. "I don't think so. Not yet, at least. But we're going to find out." The Genesis slowed as they approached the asteroid field. Outside the viewport, the asteroids looked like a chaotic jumble of rock and debris, drifting lazily in space, but there was an unnatural symmetry to the way they clustered together. The signal was unmistakable, coming from deep within the belt, hidden beneath layers of rock and dust. "Prepare for landing," Riker ordered. "We're going in." The ship's engines hummed as it descended toward the asteroid field, navigating through the jagged terrain with expert precision. Every eye on the Fakidi bridge was fixed on the view screen, waiting for the moment when the Genesis would make contact with the source of the signal. The tension was palpable, each second stretching into eternity. Suddenly, a flash of light pierced the darkness. Something deep within the asteroid field was glowing, its pulsing energy nearly blinding in its intensity. The crew gasped, the power of the signal overwhelming even their most advanced sensors. "That's it," Tran whispered, her voice trembling. "The source of the signal, it's inside one of the asteroids." Riker didn't hesitate. "Bring us in closer." As they drew closer to the anomaly, the asteroid before them began to shift. It wasn't just a rock. No, this was something far more intricate. The surface cracked open like the shell of an ancient egg, revealing a massive structure hidden beneath layers of rock. The structure was alien, smooth, metallic, and ancient in design, its surface covered in strange glyphs that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. "That's not N'Zoth," Lieutenant Tran murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "This is something older." Something stirred within Riker's chest. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, to retreat to safety, but he knew they couldn't. They had come this far, and whatever this was, whatever was hidden in this ancient alien ruin, it held the key to humanity's future. Docking port. "Ahead," Voss said, his voice tight. "We'll be able to land right next to it." The Genesis eased into position, and the crew began preparing for what they were about to face. Riker felt a knot tighten in his stomach. What they were about to encounter could very well be their salvation, or their doom. The N'Zoth had been a formidable enemy, but this was something far beyond even their wildest nightmares. "Admiral," Voss said, his voice sharp, "I've detected movement. Something's waking up inside the structure." Riker's eyes widened. "What do you mean, movement?" "It's not mechanical," Voss explained, his hands flying across the controls. "It's something biological. I'm reading a pulse, an energy signature. It's alive." The hair on the back of Riker's neck stood on end. "Alive?" Before Voss could respond, a low hum filled the air, a strange, resonating sound that seemed to echo from within the very walls of the Genesis. It was almost hypnotic, like a call, beckoning them deeper into the structure. "That's our cue," Riker said, steeling himself. "Prepare to disembark. We're going in." The crew quickly suited, up each of them moving with the urgency of soldiers about to face an unknown threat. Riker's hand tightened around the handle of his sidearm as he stepped onto the platform that would take them into the heart of the structure. There was no telling what they would find inside. It could be a weapon, a piece of ancient technology, or even something far more dangerous. As they exited the Genesis, the silence of the asteroid field enveloped them. The air was thick with tension as Riker led the way, his mind racing with questions. What was this ancient force that had been hidden away for so long? And why had it been left to slumber for eons, only to awaken now, at this critical juncture in human history? The hallway inside the structure was narrow, dark, and winding. The walls were adorned with the same glowing glyphs Riker had seen on the surface, and they pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost alive as they moved deeper into the labyrinthine corridors. Riker couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something was waiting for them at the heart of this place. Finally, they reached a vast chamber at the core of the structure, a massive circular room bathed in an eerie, pulsating light. In the center of the room stood a colossal stone altar, upon which lay a strange object, partially obscured by a veil of energy. It was unlike anything Riker had ever seen, a swirling, glowing sphere of energy with tendrils of light reaching outward like veins, stretching toward the walls of the chamber. "Is that it?" Tran whispered, her voice filled with awe. Riker nodded, his pulse quickening. "I think it is." As they approached the altar, the sphere pulsed again, brighter this time, as if sensing their presence. The air grew thick with tension, and Riker felt his heart race. Whatever this was, it was not of this galaxy. It was something older, something that predated even the most ancient civilizations. And then, as if in response to their arrival, the sphere shifted. Its surface rippled like liquid, and for the briefest of moments, Riker saw something. Someone within it. An image, flickering, like a hologram of a face, alien, ancient, and wise. "Welcome, travelers," the voice came, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. "You have awoken the last of my kind, and now the universe will know your true purpose." The hairs on Riker's neck stood on end as the figure's words echoed in his mind. He realized with chilling clarity that this was no accident. Humanity had been drawn here for a reason, and that reason would change everything. The galaxy, it seemed, was just beginning to awaken.